Good evening. Please stand for the invocation, which will be delivered by Mrs. Hercel Webster Brooks.
Let us pray. Almighty and eternal Father, we thank you for spared lives. We thank you for this opportunity, dear God, where we can gather once again to discuss matters relevant to nation building, a healthier nation, dear God. We bring before you the presenters, dear God, tonight. Give them the courage, the wisdom, the understanding to deliver their presentations. We remember our Seroptimist members in the wider community, Seroptimist International of Great Britain and Ireland, Seroptimist International Caribbean Network, Seroptimist International Anguilla, and all the individuals, dear God, who come to support us. We remember the members who are absent, dear God, who would like to have been here and for whatever reason cannot. We bring before you the abused, the voiceless, the perpetrators, as we discuss this topic tonight, gender-based violence. Women issues, not just a social issue. Dear God, this we pray in your wonderful name. Amen, amen.
Thank you, Mrs. Webster Brooks. You may be seated. Honorable Minister for Social Development and Education, Ms. Diane Kentish Rogers, Representative UN Women Caribbean, Ms. Tony Broder, whom you'll hear from virtually in a short while. President, Seroptimist International Anguilla, Mrs. Angelina Carty. Seroptimist International is our partners for this initiative. Esteemed panelists, Dr. Ayana Gums, Apostle Elmead Allen, who's on his way, Mrs. Angelina Carty, and Detective Constable Patricia D'Souza. Welcome. Our moderator for this evening's proceeding, Mrs. Hyacinth Bradley, who is also the Community Services Planner and also the coordinator for PAVE and our Mental Health and Psychosocial Support Team Leader. Invited guests and members of the audience, media partners, good evening and a warm welcome to our Women's Forum. For the past 16 days, like much of the world, we have been observing the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence here in Anguilla. This evening's forum is themed Gender-Based Violence, not just a woman's issue, but a social and health issue. Gender-based violence remains a threat to our physical and social development. In Anguilla, we are faced with violence against women and girls. Data collected by the Royal Anguilla Police Force shows that reported cases doubled from 71 in 2012 to 148 in 2017. That is within a 5-year period. Data also shows intimate partner violence accounts for over 40% of reported cases. So far, for the period June to August of this year, there was 79 reported cases of domestic violence. Everyone has the right to feel safe and secure. And where this is not present, people's ability to function in the family, community, and society is likely to be impaired, as their self-realization and development are affected. Gender-based violence is therefore an obstacle to the realization of every person's well-being and to their right to fulfillment and self-development. GBV is not just about women and girls. Moreover, it requires the involvement of different services and the inclusion of everyone. Educational awareness, community involvement, and preventative measures are critical in responding to and ending violence. This evening, our esteemed panel will dissect gender-based violence. They will share their professional experiences, the challenges they have encountered, and recommendations to guide how we move forward. I encourage each of you to listen attentively and to also offer your perspectives during the question and answer segment. Welcome again. At this time, please join me in welcoming the Honorable Minister of Social Development and Education, Ms. Diane Kentish-Rogers, for some brief remarks.
Thank you, Kim. Good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here. I say pleasure, but I'm using that word very loosely because when we're talking about gender-based violence, it's uncomfortable that we have to even discuss this topic. It's unfortunate that we even have to discuss this topic. And part of the reason why gender-based violence has become or risen to such a position in our societies whereby we have to measure the cost to implement preventative measures, interventions that protect our women and girls in our society. I'd also like to say our boys, but I want to focus it really on the primary victim of gender-based violence, which is women. And that is because we've had and seen such an increase in gender-based violence in our societies that we've had to turn our attentions to the cost that it has to our societies, not simply from the perspective of it being a human rights issue, but also of it being a health issue, a social issue, and increasingly an economic issue. What we have seen in the last decade internationally is that gender-based violence costs governments and private businesses an estimated $1.5 trillion a year. That's a very staggering figure. And when you think about what comprises that $1.5 trillion in our societies and our economies, it comprises of things as simple as days away from work. I'm not able to come into work today. Replacing staff, reduce productivity, reputational harm. And from a governmental perspective, governments have now had to invest money in intervention and prevention. For the Gender Affairs Unit here in Anguilla, one of the matters that we've been very keen on seeing implemented is looking at prevention from the school. And we know, and we've seen the evidence that gender-based violence is when we see it played out, these patterns of behavior can sometimes be picked up by our students, by our young boys. And it now raises the responsibility of government to intervene from a very early age to ensure that the corrective actions or the remedial actions for those who would not have family members who will point out directly that this behavior is not appropriate, it's not acceptable, that the government now has the responsibility of intervening and making sure that we protect our citizens in this community. And because in our society it is sometimes looked upon as a private citizen's concern, as in, if it's not your business, you don't say anything about it, you don't raise a hand, you don't look in your neighbor's yard, but you whisper. That has made it even more difficult to address in the Caribbean context. But I am encouraged by the work of the Gender Affairs Unit here in Anguilla and the Community Services Planner in raising the profile of gender affairs in Anguilla and in tackling these conversations within our school environments. And while we know that it is an issue that is very difficult to tackle, we know that our criminal prosecutions, specifically for gender-based violence issues, have a very low rate of conviction by virtue of the nature of the crime itself. We must continue to rally around our women, to protect them, to make them feel comfortable and safe in going to the institutions that have the responsibility of listening to them and protecting them. And I hope that as we continue to do work here in the Gender Affairs Unit and the Ministry of Social Development, that our society in general can become more sensitive to our individual responsibilities, to our neighbors, and to our children in the future, because we never know what will happen to our children. And so from the perspective of tonight's forum that discusses gender-based violence not only as a women's issue, but as a social and health issue, which we talk about public health, and I'm sure you'll hear more about it from our wonderful panelists this evening. I also wanted to talk about the economic impact, because I do find that a lot of people don't pay attention to specific issues until it hits them in the pocket. And so this evening, I'm here in support of the panelists and the Gender Affairs Unit as they continue to bring awareness to a very serious issue within our country. And I look at everyone here in this room and those listening online as partners in seriously addressing gender-based violence in Anguilla. So thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this evening.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you for your continued support. As Minister Kentish Rogers just now, gender-based violence is all of us responsibility. So each of us can do our own part in bringing awareness to and ending gender-based violence. So as indicated earlier, this evening we'll be featuring remarks by Miss Toni Brodner, who is the representative for UN Women Caribbean, and she will be joining us virtually. So please join me in welcoming Ms. Brodner.
It is a pleasure to be with you virtually, albeit today. Ms. Gleneva Hodge, the president of the Anguilla National Council of Women and the chair of the SAFE board, Ms. Tawana Gums, a local medical doctor in accident and emergency, Mrs. Angelina Carty, senior social worker, the Department of Social Development, and Officer Patricia D'Souza of the Safeguarding Unit, all of you as well participating, and of course, victims and survivors. I bring you greetings during these 16 days of activism for our team at the UN Women Multi-Country Office in the Caribbean. My name is Toni Brodner, and I'm the representative of the UN Women Multi-Country Office in the Caribbean. As you are aware, the theme for this year, during the 16 days of activism, is Unite, activism to end violence against women and girls. It centers and honors the work of our civil society actors in the Caribbean. And we focus this on honoring the Caribbean grassroots feminist movement, radical grounding of ending violence against women and girls activism in the Caribbean. Both globally and the Caribbean sub-theme reminds us that each and every one of us is called to be an activist. And it also reminds us of the work that has already been done by civil society activists in our region. Many of the services and the strengthened response that we see to gender-based violence in our region would not be possible without the tireless advocacy and service of civil society. You may say that in the UN, we create so many campaigns, but these campaigns are to focus in on messaging needed for awareness and needed for action. An identified sub-campaign this year is to push forward, act to end violence against women and girls. And it recognizes that persistent work of women activists, women human rights defenders, survivor advocates, and individuals worldwide. The critical message amplifies the conviction that despite efforts to roll back women's rights, silence is not an option. When we unite, when they push back, we push forward. Now, the work of many of you and the theme of this particular forum in particular is critical because gender-based violence is not just a woman's issue. Violence against women and girls, which is one form of gender-based violence, is not just a woman's issue. It is a social issue, it is a health issue, it is a citizen security issue, it is a development issue. This is why we need all hands on deck to address this scourge, because this violence against women and girls is just one form, one manifestation of the violence that is unfortunately overtaking many of our societies. It is demonstrative of the belief that violence is inappropriate. Violence is not only appropriate, but it is a justified action when there's conflict. And one thing we're starting to see more and more is that when there's this belief that it is a justified action that can be used to address conflict because it does not resolve conflict, we start seeing it used against the most vulnerable in our societies. That's why we see violence against women and girls as a canary in the coal mine. Because if we are targeting women, girls, children, the elderly, we know that we're at a significant tipping point in our societies. Global data shows that 45,000 women and girls were killed by their intimate partners or another family member in 2021. This is data from our colleagues at UNODC, and that more than 5 women or girls are killed every hour by someone in their own family. We also know from the Caribbean that on average every 5th woman in the Caribbean has experienced some form of sexual harassment or non-partner sexual violence in their lifetime. And the 5 national Caribbean surveys on violence against women and girls prevalence demonstrated that 46% of women in the Caribbean have experienced some form of violence in their lifetime. And you can find more of this data on the UN Women, Caribbean Development Bank, Caribbean Women's Count portal. And you find that at caribbeanwomencount.unwomen.org. Now, these figures are above the global average. We don't have data yet in the Caribbean for femicide rates, but if the figures of general violence are above that of the global average, we would hope that the figures of femicide too are not above. Now, in that 5-country analysis, I want to draw specific emphasis to the research brief that looks at these findings, because while Anguilla was not represented in this data, what we see is that the reports to the police, and this is administrative data, because we know that violence against women and girls is one of the most underreported crimes in the world, or the crimes that fall under the umbrella of violence against women and girls: domestic violence, rape, attempted rape, human trafficking, sexual harassment are among the most underreported in the world. So that's why we do the prevalence, to find out what the prevalence actually is, reliably. But when we look at the administrative data in Anguilla, in 2020 and 2021, there was an increase of 161 and 159 in terms of the cases of domestic violence compared to what has been reported now in terms of 79. Is that because violence has gone down? Or is that because persons no longer feel that reporting will get the response that they want? We see that intimate partner violence cases were quite high in 2018 and 2019 at 184 and 180 respectively, and then went to 169 in 2020, which is still quite high for the population size of Anguilla. So what I've shared with you through this data is the importance of understanding that this is not an issue that really should be dealt with in isolation. There is a life cycle that we need to address around the violence that women and girls experience. As I indicated earlier, this is just the canary in the coal mine. When we look at the data as well, it shows us that men who are more likely to choose violence in their partnerships are more likely to also choose violence with other men, and that children who have experienced or witnessed violence in their household are more at risk of becoming perpetrators and victims or survivors. So we really need to start looking at the ways in which this social issue of violence has become a public health issue and a citizen security issue. The way in which we move forward is through the experiences of the experts on these kinds of panels to let us know that violence not only has negative consequences for women and their families, but also the community and country at large. But what's worked? What has worked in prevention? What has worked in terms of response? How can we use our social sectors and our health sectors to better address the scourge of violence in our societies? There are great examples around the region, and I know there are great examples in Anguilla. We've been able to set up hotlines, and a few years ago, I was able to see and be in the beautiful country of Anguilla to work collaboratively on a South-South engagement with the government of Antigua and Barbuda to share their experiences with setting up a hotline in Antigua so that one could be set up in Anguilla. We also have fantastic rehabilitation programs working with men and boys who are first-time offenders so that rehabilitation does not necessarily have to mean incarceration. So looking forward to hearing more of the outcomes of this particular session and how not only UN Women, but of course UN Women, but the broader UN system can support in ensuring that violence is not the reality of anyone in Anguilla. Thank you.
Thank you so very much for your remarks, Tony. I really appreciate the support of UN Women, and I know that Tony and her team is most likely watching us online right now. So we look forward to welcoming you back to Anguilla for another visit. Before we move along, I'd also like to acknowledge the presence of the manager for the British Overseas Sites, Dr. Phyllis Fleming Banks, and Senior Administrative Officer at UE Open Campus, Anguilla, Ms. Renee Henry. The UE has been a partner with us, with Gender Affairs Unit, over the years, and so welcome. Okay, so we are at the point where we will be hearing from our panelists, but before we get to that, I will introduce to you our moderator for this evening. Mrs. Bradley, a former secondary school teacher and senior youth development officer, currently serves as community services planner in the Ministry of Social Development and Education, as well as the coordinator for PAVE, which is Partners Advocating for Violence Eradication, a public-private community-led initiative that focuses on strategies for crime and violence reduction on Anguilla. Mrs. Bradley holds a Bachelor's of Arts degree in psychology with Spanish with distinction from the University of Santa Clara, Cuba, and a Master's of Arts degree in public policy analysis and management from the University of Yorkshire in the UK. Mrs. Bradley has also received tertiary level training in areas such as supervisory management and leadership, mediation and counseling, and research and advocacy. She's a senior trainer in community-based psychosocial support, community research methodology, mental health, and psychological first aid. Mrs. Bradley's involvement in voluntary work includes serving on the Anguilla Red Cross and the Anguilla Seroptimist Club, coordinating the Safe Mental Health and Domestic Violence Prevention 24-hour hotline and providing training and translation support to the Spanish-speaking community. Please join me in welcoming Mrs. Hyacinth Bradley, our moderator, for the discussion segment.
Thank you, Kim. Good night, everyone. Based on what we've been hearing this evening from our Honorable Minister with responsibility for gender affairs, from our gender coordinator, and our colleague at UN Women, we see that gender-based violence is a global pandemic. Even here on our tiny island of Anguilla, we speak of in excess of 160 reported cases of domestic violence in 2020, and another over 159 reported cases of domestic violence last year. The issue of gender-based violence is not only devastating for survivors and their families, but also causes significant health, social, and economic costs. Failure to address the issue from a community and from a national stance entails a significant cost for the future. Numerous studies have shown that children growing up in households, and our minister would have alluded to that, children growing up in households and community that propagate violence are more likely to become survivors themselves, attracting and maintaining cycles of violent relationships, or they themselves become perpetrators. Your education level, the color of your skin, where you're from, or who you are for, does not shield you from the ills of gender-based violence. We are all impacted in some way or another. Gender-based violence knows no boundaries. It affects women and girls, boys and men of all socio-economic backgrounds. Further, the significant and long-lasting effects on our physical and mental health of a survivor of gender-based violence should never be underestimated. From injury and unintended pregnancy, sexual transmitted infections, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and even death. Decreasing gender-based violence requires a commitment from all of us. Community-based commitment, a multi-pronged approach, and sustained, honest engagement with everyone. Each of us has a part to play, had a part to play, and continue to have a part to play in the fight of gender-based violence eradication. I am pleased to support the Gender-Based Affairs Unit, the ministry, and our community leaders in the fight against gender-based violence. And this evening is my, I'm saying esteemed pleasure, but as the minister, I'm taking it lightly, because honestly, we should be discussing the many stands we've taken to eliminate gender-based violence and be celebrating significant reducing cases. But unfortunately, that's not what our data shows. But our panelists will present to us this evening from their experts' position what they've noticed, what are our shortcomings, and how we as a people, how we as a community could work together in the eradication of gender-based violence. I'll take this opportunity to welcome our panel members to the table. Panel members will come in after their introductions. Our first panel member is Miss Angelina Carty. Mrs. Carty is a professional social worker gaining her qualifications in 1997 at the University of North London. We won't say anybody's ages this evening. In addition, she has a Management and NVQ Assessors Award. Angelina is currently a senior social worker for the Family and Social Services Unit in Anguilla within the Department of Social Development. She's born in the UK with a heritage of St. Lucia. Okay. Her past work experience includes working in the UK, where she trained staff with Barnados, UK's largest children's charity, and she managed a number of children's services. She also worked in St. Lucia with the government's Children and Family Social Services as a social worker and led the establishment of the first government place of safety for young people in need of care and protection. In Anguilla, her past work experiences includes serving as the supervisor at the Zenaida Haven and the center manager of the Elios Care Center, a family support ministry. She also served as an assessor for the Juvenile Magistrates Court, hearing matters that relate to young people in need of care and protection and in conflict with the law. Angelina is involved in voluntary work as a mentor to young people, supporting the SAFE hotline, and sitting on various management advisory boards. She is the co-creator of the Experiencing the Sacred Woman program, which is designed as a pilot project to support women in the Anguillian community. Welcome, Ms. Angelina Carty. Apostle Elmid Aline is presently the pastor of Kingdom Vision Apostolic Church Tabernacle in the Farringtons. He is also the chaplain at His Majesty's Prison, Anguilla. Antiguan by birth, Apostle Allen lived a number of years in the United Kingdom and worked extensively in a number of Caribbean islands, including St. Martin, both under the umbrella of religious and community-based projects in the areas of education, gender, domestic violence, and drug abuse. He holds a degree in nursing, gained that degree in 1981 from the School of Nursing, Halberton Hospitals in St. John's, Antigua. He is also a qualified social worker and specialized as a mental health social worker in 1998. He's a qualified counselor, and he holds a diploma in systemic counseling. He also holds a degree in religious studies and theology. He's an ordained minister of religion from year 2000. He's a co-founder of a Head School of Excellence in St. Martin, a program for children with learning disability, specializing in children with autism. Ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome Apostle Elmid Aline. Dr. Ayana Gomes was born in Anguilla and is a graduate of the Mount St. Vincent College in Riverdale, New York. She obtained her medical degree at Jose Asef Yara Medical School in Ciego de Avila, Cuba. Her residency was at Victoria Hospital in St. Lucia. Dr. Gomes has over 13 years' experience as an emergency room doctor. It is in this area of emergency medicine where most of her interest lies. Dr. Gum speaks Spanish as her second language, which is very helpful with the growing Spanish population in Anguilla. Her other interests include spending time with family and playing sports. And she's also a member of a motorcycle club, not a bicycle, a motorcycle club called The Squad. Help me welcome Dr. Ajana Gums. Detective Patricia de Souza. Patricia de Souza is a diligent detective and criminal investigator with over a decade of experience in law enforcement. She has over 9 years of experience in specialized crime, primarily sexual assault and child abuse. Her desire to assist others, particularly young people, led her to pursue a Bachelor of Science degree in social work, which she now holds. She is dedicated to public safety and believes in the rule of law and the fair administration of justice. She is a strong supporter of victims' rights and equality. Help me welcome Detective De Souza. Another round of applause for our esteemed panel. As we shared earlier, our panel will delve into the issue of gender-based violence, their experiences with survivors, challenges faced by their respective sector, as well as recommendations for eliminating gender-based violence. Each panelist will present their initial perspective, experience, as it relates to the topic of gender-based violence for 3 to 5 minutes. As moderator, I will then support with the facilitation of further discussion and questions from the floor and via our online platforms. Members of the audience are asked to hold the questions. We will take questions after our presentation. Thank you. We have papers available for questions. We'll start with our first presenter based on introductions, Mrs. Angelina Carty.
Good evening. Please allow me to adopt the protocols established. I believe it's on.
1, 2, 1, 2.
Okay, is that better? Thanks. Okay. What I'd like to do is to just give you a little backdrop in relation to the work that I do. Okay, so as a senior social worker for the Family and Social Services Unit within the Department of Social Development, I can attest to the fact that this issue at hand this evening, gender-based violence, is all too prevalent in our community. Now, we heard some stats earlier on from the police, but you'll be interested to hear this one, that between 2017 to 2021, the department recorded 20 cases under the direct heading of domestic violence. Now remember, reported and actual differ. Only a percentage is reported. During other assessments, however, within families, domestic violence is indirectly indicated. While some have felt in the past it is none of our business what goes on in individuals' private lives, as was expressed earlier, I believe, by the minister, nothing can be further from the truth. Unfortunately, the impact on society as a whole is far outreaching and has implications for all sectors of society, as domestic violence has been said to be at the root of other violence. Children in the family witnessing and replicating what they've seen failing in school, becoming a child protection issue. The workplace, absenteeism, and unemployment. Medical professionals' interventions, and mental health. Now, we know this because we end up having to refer or having people referred to our department as a result of some domestic violence or gender-based violence experiences. Now, just to demonstrate how incidents of domestic violence touch the various sectors, the structures and resources that exist in Anguilla are under-resourced, if at all available, unfortunately, in Anguilla. So let me just give you a little touch in relation to a particular case. And I've kept it anonymous and changed a few things in it so as people, Anguilla's small, okay, so people can't say, oh yes, I know that this is such and such. So the client is an unemployed, non-Anguillian national and lived in her husband's family home. The couple have a child under 3 years old. The police were being called on a regular basis due to reports of disturbances in the home. On one particular evening, there was a live altercation with her husband, and it was deemed to be necessary to separate the couple as the man appeared to have sustained an injury shedding blood. The client was indeed removed from the home, and at the expressed wish of the husband, all her belongings and the child's had to accompany her. She was taken to the only family member's home that she had in Anguilla, which was overcrowded, for the night with the child. The duty on-call officer, which we have as part of the work that we do in the department, there's a 24-hour number in terms of supporting clients and when there's emergencies. They were informed of the incident that night, and the following day, this case was presented to the office of the Department of Social Development. Now, I'll leave it to you to ask questions afterwards in terms of what really happened with this case, okay? And talking about the various resources that we have at our disposal. So I'll hand over to my colleague.
Good evening, each and everyone. It's great to be here. As I look around at the table, I sort of ask myself, what am I doing here? With such a topic as this, I guess others would wonder too, what does he have to say? I'm speaking tonight from the perspective of one, as a minister of religion for a number of years, also from someone who has experienced gender abuse, also as someone who have seen gender abuse in my own home and had to experience the after effects of it. I do not claim to have the greatest experience, but those that I have been able to use them over the years in helping numerous women, and dare I say, men also. It is great that sometimes we say better late than never, but in this instance, I don't think it's better late than never. I think it's the right time. It would have been nice if we here in Anguilla could have been doing something that we are doing now a number of years ago. But there is still a lot of lives that we can save, still a lot of families that we can save. One of my major position that I take is that I believe that if we can not even help all of the men who are the perpetrators of domestic violence, we can help our young men, our boys, our 14-year-olds, our 13 and 15-year-old boys who are seeing this sort of gender abuse in their homes and are growing up to believe this is the way life should be. I'm also very concerned about our young girls because they are seeing it. And many of them are believing that it is okay, it's normal. I say no. We cannot allow this to go on. So even as a male, as a man, I would hope that what little that I can do, both from a religious background and from a non-religious background, can help to make changes, not only in Anguilla, but wherever our voices can be heard. I took the opportunity to invite a number of men to this program tonight. Whether I should or should not, I wasn't sure. But I did, because as a counselor, one of the things that you realize is that sometimes until we as men come face to face with our victims and understand the hurt and the pain that we have caused, not only to the females, but to our family. As our minister said, it is not just a woman thing, it's a social thing. It is a life thing. It is our future. And so I pray that as we discuss tonight, I hope that as we discuss tonight, that all of our information, all of what we have to share, will not just stay in this room, but I'm calling on our esteemed project worker, and I know she will, be able to put together something, a book, leaflets, something that will help others, those that we're trying to help. Thank you.
Good evening. As a medical doctor, it's not every day that a person that experiences some form of gender violence reaches your doorstep. Many times we don't see them in the hospital. But on the occasion that they do arrive at our doorsteps, we try and counsel them the best we can and advise them in the correct direction. There are many forms of gender violence. In the case of medicine, it can be a fatal outcome or a non-fatal outcome. Under the non-fatal outcome, there are many forms of violence. It could be injuries, it could be psychological violence, it could be emotional, and under these specific forms of violence, there are many steps that, as a medical doctor, you would have to take to help the person that comes in front of you. So it's not only healing the physical body, you also have to heal the mental state of the patient as well. So these steps can take years. It's not just, I see you now, I fixed the physical problem. No, it's not that. You have to fix the mental issues as well that can come around from gender violence. One specific case that I can remember, a family that had several cases of violence where kids were present in that situation. We found that later on in life, one of the kids started to develop mental issues. And those mental issues stemmed from all of the violence that he saw as a child, that he experienced. And he had issues towards men. Him being a man in his own, had issues dealing with men because he saw violence from a man against a woman that he loved. So there are many things that can stem from gender violence. It doesn't only affect the persons involved directly, it can also affect the surrounding people that actually see it, that actually care for these two people. So there are many things we have to look at when we are trying to heal a person that has experienced gender violence.
Good evening, everyone. Protocol observed. I'm very new to your beautiful island, Anguilla. I've only been here since 2020. I work in the Safeguarding Investigations Unit, and basically we are expected to deal with matters that involve domestic issues, sexual offenses, and situations of that type. What I've noticed, let me just say, I'm actually coming from Jamaica. And we all know Jamaica, violent country. And what is frightening to me, or is of concern to me, is that what I'm seeing in Anguilla, we might not be on that scale as Jamaica. We are smaller, yes, but we are getting to the point where we're getting comfortable with certain crime. This is one such crime. Many people, they are fearful of reporting these crimes because they're ashamed. Let me just say, there's nothing to be ashamed of. As the moderator rightly say, domestic violence or violence against women, it's everybody's concern, everybody's business. You might be surprised to know that people you think dressing pretty and is of a certain esteem, they are faced with this too, but they are so ashamed to report it. And the frightening thing is, most of the time when the situation arises, when the report is made to the police, the abuse or the crime, it was not the first time. Many people, when they do come to us, sometimes they would be like, I just really want you to warn them, officer. And that is done. But where do we draw the line? I often encourage people, report the matter to the police, let there be a written record. Take the matter before the court. Most people are fearful of reporting because, I don't want this person to go to prison. Or they have family members that would come to the victim, or a friend of the victim that would come and beg, so to speak, beg the victim not to go and report it. Listen, report the matter. We can get help for you. And sometimes, for me, it's not about sending people to prison. There are rehabilitation programs that are there. The perpetrators themselves oftentimes need help because hurt people, right? And sometimes people don't really know how to handle situation. But with conflict resolutions and those things, tell somebody. That's what I encourage you guys to do. Persons are faced with this. If you know, tell. Do not become like my country where we believe informers are to dead. I am one of those persons who believe informers live. It's high time that we let criminals know that we have to speak up, we're gonna stand up. One of the things we need to start with is just know that this is a zero tolerance situation. We have children watching us and we have to change these patterns. The RAPF is ready to help Anguilla. I know that the community relations now, they are doing so much more because they are now police officers who are in zones. And that is one way we are looking to foster better relationship with the community. So we are here to help. And like I said, gender-based violence is not acceptable, and it's high time we say it's not acceptable, and we do things. We report the crimes, report it if you even suspect. You don't have to really have evidence that is happening, but if you suspect it, call the Safeguarding Investigation Unit, call the police, and we will check it out for you.
Thank you so much to our panelists for their brief introductions and presentations. We heard from social worker Mrs. Carty that spoke to having over 20 cases being reported between 2017 and 2021. And a key note is that, as she stated, not many cases are being reported. She spoke about the Department of Social Development being under-resourced and that department holding such a critical responsibility in the fight against gender-based violence. Apostle Elmid Aline spoke about everyone can do something. Everyone can do something. You may not be able to work with the perpetrator, but you could work with our young men, our 14-year-olds, our 15-year-olds, support in the redirection. Let us be proactive. Dr. Gums spoke about our various types of violence. Oftentimes we see violence as just being physical, what you see, the injuries that you see, but the psychological violence, that of humiliation and verbal abuse, sexual violence, of rape, socioeconomic violence, and even our harmful traditional practices, the some forms of violence. Our detective, De Souza, spoke about we should not get comfortable at all when we speak or if we know of domestic violence cases. The mere fact that we're a small country, one case is one case too much. At no time should we be comfortable. There may be a shame in reporting. There may be also a fear in reporting. But in order for us to help someone, we have to say something. And again, all of us has a responsibility. You don't need to know all of the factors. You don't need to have any critical evidence. But if you do suspect, you speak to the proper authorities, the police, and they could support in investigation. Thank you so very much for these, for your presentations. We now open the floor for questions. Our Honorable Minister.
Good night. Okay. What I'm very interested in trying to get a solution for is really how do we address in our very small community issues and fears around confidentiality relating to reporting specific matters around gender-based violence. And these are two questions. So the first is really how do we address concerns about confidentiality? And the second is about how do we support victims who are afraid to speak out because the perpetrators are perceived to be quite powerful in our society.
I'd like to pick up on the point with regards to confidentiality within a very small country. And from the time I came here, it's been a major thing for me. And I heard Ms. Bradley saying about who you for. It's one of the questions that gets asked all the time. And I've found, because of my British accent, people feel a little bit more comfortable sometimes speaking to me because I'm not necessarily for anybody here in Anguilla. But how do we seriously, my question is, how do we seriously address confidentiality in the Anguillian context? Because so many people know so many people and think they know so many things about people. But speaking to agencies, I think, is the best way around, because sometimes people tell a friend, who will tell a friend, who will tell a friend. And in Anguilla, that means that you've told everybody, okay? Whereas if people come through to the different agencies, so the Department of Social Development, we have an agreement, what's the word that I'm looking for, where we have to hold confidentiality. It's part and parcel of our ethical, thank you. We have an ethical responsibility, and so we have to hold confidence of people that come to us. And people will say, well, okay, so you've got people who work in there who are for people. But when anything comes through to our department, and it goes to our director, and those cases are then allocated to social workers, some of the considerations are who may be related to this person, okay, what that relationship's about. And if we get a case like that, if I'm to be given a case like that, I know that there are maybe certain social workers in the department that we wouldn't share the information with. And those social workers understand that we wouldn't be sharing that, and they wouldn't be expected to know anything about that particular case, because we want to hold confidences as much as possible. We've been working a lot closer with the police and health. There's been a lot of work trying to work with like a multidisciplinary approach. And even then, there are selected people who are part of those groups, and certain information is shared within those groups. So while people are out there thinking that everybody, once they say it to somebody in our agency, that everybody knows about our business, when I speak to clients, one of the things that I do say to them is that if anybody knows about your business or what you've shared with me, it's because you told somebody else, okay? It's my professional integrity will not permit me to be going out there and speaking about other people's business. Sorry, I hate a microphone, my apologies. It doesn't permit me to do that because it's not in the best interest of who it is that I'm working for. And we have to reassure children all the time when they come and report things to us or they say things in the way that we get information from people. And we know that we've got trusted professionals. I work very closely with Officer D'Souza, and I can honestly say that that same kind of practice principle is there. I work with, unfortunately I've not been able to work with the esteemed doctor here, but certainly some of her colleagues, and I know that that's there. And I've worked with Pastor with, you know, in terms of psychosocial support and stuff, and I know that that's there. So the community has to get to a place of trust with regards to confidentiality. Stop speaking your business out there and bring the business in here where we're in the business of looking after your business.
I think that we're coining some things here. But speaking on the importance of confidentiality has always been a major concern for me. One, you can understand, coming from a religious perspective, someone can come to you and they can talk to you about something, and you can go to church on Sunday and preach a message and they think that you are speaking about them. However, one of the things that my years of living in the UK has taught me is that, and my colleague made mention of it, is that I say to people as soon as they come to talk to me, one of the first 3 or 5 questions I ask, who else have you discussed this matter with? And they would tell you, well, only one person, you know. And I said, okay, one person. And when did this happen first? 2 months ago. And when it happened, who did you speak to? Well, just my friend there. So that's now 2 persons, and as I said, I'm speaking from my experience. As a minister, as a pastor, I have I've been called out of bed at all hours of night. I've gone to people's home, and they expect you to be confidential, but they themselves are not confidential. Whether it's because of the fact that they are just frustrated and angry. And so I think that as we as professionals, as we continue to work with people, we are faced with one of the biggest problems we are faced with here in Anguilla. I've had the opportunity, and I give God thanks, that I've worked in just about every island in the Caribbean. Just about every island. I worked for PAHO a number of years ago in my younger age, PAHO, and I had that opportunity. And Anguilla is my home. Anguilla is the best place. I've learned that wherever you live, you always say that's the best place. Isn't that so? And so, but one of the problems we have here with confidentiality that's been said, and it will be said again for the night, is that we are a very small, knitted community. You cannot go 10 steps without meeting someone. I'm married to an Anguillan, and I thank God that I'm a nice gentleman, because I remember one day I was speaking to a young lady, just generally sitting at a table speaking, and by the time I got home in the night, my wife said to me, "Oh, you met my cousin." I said, "Which cousin?" And so everybody is related. And while that is good, it has its dangers. And so we as professionals, we are always fighting that battle of being confidential. The question you ask, how do we help? What do we do to maintain, I think you're asking, confidentiality, right? I think it begins with us, and I believe there are many of us as professionals who uphold that policy of confidentiality. There are many of us who work very close with that. We have to continue. One of the things we need to begin to do is to teach, even in school, what it means to be confidential. Confidentiality is different to hiding. There are children in school who keep secrets and whatever, and you have to know when to speak. As a counselor, I will say to clients, especially when you're dealing with children, just a few weeks ago, I had a young teenager who wanted to talk, and I realized that he would not talk at all, and I said to the mother, "Well, could you just sit over there for me?" And when I asked him if he's okay to talk, he said no. And I asked the mother, "Okay, would you just sit by the door for me?" But the minute she started to do, he started to talk to me. And the first thing he said to me is that everything I do, my mother tells everybody. Do you understand? Everything I do, but she said, but only the bad things she tells people. And he said, why should I believe that you are not going to do the same thing? It took me 3 sessions to win his heart. And so it is not just only about the people that we work with, but even the parents sometimes, when they will go and tell someone else, and young people who are being abused and who are going through certain things, they really don't want what is going on to be shared all over. And so it's a hard work. I don't think that there is any manual that came with it or quick fix. We have to maintain our stand of confidentiality.
From the police perspective, we are held at higher, the safeguarding investigation units. We were specially trained. We basically know that we are not supposed to share certain information. Even if you call the police station and report, what the officer writes on the system, they don't really write the details. You will see they just write specific words. Then when we come in the morning, we read that report and then we go in. Then we have a system where the matters are coverted, right, where necessary, so that not even the other police in the force can see that, except for who have the authority to do so. So we really take confidentiality at high regards in the police force.
In the medical field, it's part of our ethical oath to keep confidentiality. So we would be breaking our oath if we did not keep the confidentiality of our clients. But sometimes, even though a doctor or a nurse did not release any information, the situation we have where somebody might overhear something because, for example, in the emergency room, sometimes you have to see patients in close proximity to each other. In that case, sometimes we try and bring clients in one at a time as to where someone might not overhear what's going on. But in some modalities, it's not practical to do that because sometimes you might have an emergency and something a little less emergent that you might have to deal with, and they happen at the same time. We just have to keep in mind that there are multiple clients in the emergency room at a time, and we try to keep our voices down so that no one overhears. And also, with passers-by, we try and keep all of our paperwork in specific areas so that no one can just look down and see what's going on. But as the other panelists said, a lot of people in Anguilla are related. And if they see, they talk.
Minister, you made a mention about, the second question you asked, I wanted to just say something on that. Right. Yeah, that is a very, very important point to look at. In my experience, I've come across clients who, when you get to the bottom of the story and you begin to ask who, how, when, where, and whatever, you are shocked off of your feet to hear the names that are called. You yourself, as a professional, begin to wonder, how do you address this? My colleague says that she's in a unique place because she has a British accent, and so, she falls in the center. I'm not sure what accent I have, but one of the things I have built up over the years is that when it comes to people's safety, when it comes to any form of abuse, I have a zero tolerance for it. And as I said earlier, maybe a little later I'll share some of it, that I have been in that place. I have been in it physically. I have been in it from my mother. I've watched my mother being abused and all of these things. And so I have developed this thing that I go to people. What I try to do is to make sure that the information that is being given to me, I do what my grandfather used to say, make sure you look at every side of it. Because you want to make sure that before you speak to someone, that there is proof. I look for the evidence, I look for whatever. I have quite a number of police officers who I work with, who I can call on any hour of the night, and they will advise me and give me directions and whatever. I have a counselor who counsels me, who I can call on to get information. And once I am sure that the information that I have been given is right, one of the things that I try to do is to make contact with the perpetrator. It doesn't always work the best ways, but I think when people begin to realize that you're being caught out, you're not hiding anymore, no matter how big you are, no matter what title you have, you know, and I think that needs to be done more. We need to begin to realize, because it is not right for us, and I'm saying for men, to hurt other people. And because you are in a quote-unquote upstanding position, and if you're in such an upstanding position, then you should live to that upstanding position. But unfortunately, a lot of that goes on in Anguilla. A lot of it goes on in Anguilla. And we've got to, as professionals, hit it the nail on the head. It's not going to be easy, but it has to be done. Doc, you were saying, I think you...
Yes, I had one more thing to add. To do with confidentiality as well. Usually, because I am Anguillian, I'm related to a lot of people. So usually, to be able to keep that confidentiality, you try not to see family members. And most of the time, family members ask you, why are you not seeing me? Why did you call the other doctor? That's because in our hypocritical oath, we're not supposed to treat family. And why we're not supposed to treat family is because not only with confidentiality, but sometimes your views can be clouded because it's your family member. And when it comes to confidentiality as well, it helps because other family members can't call you and ask you what's going on. So when we say you're not supposed to see family, it's a reason you're not supposed to see family members.
Just a quick point on the question, the second question. The police officers, as police officers, we too take an oath of office. And to this day, in 2010, when I stood up and put up my right hand, and I said, I'm going to execute my duties without favor or affection, I mean it well. I used to even say, Mama, even if it's you, I'm going to do what I have to do. And so if all of us take that stance, it doesn't matter how powerful a person might be. And for me, well, maybe because I'm not from here, but even when I was in Jamaica carrying out my duties, I don't care who it was, the person come and make a report. My duty as a police officer is to appreciate the report and carry out investigations. And I often tell the person coming to make the report, because at the end of the day, if what you come to report is false, you are liable for prosecution. And I'm always telling the victims, as long as you're telling me the truth, I'm going to stand on your side. Even though I'm carrying out the investigation, whatever is borne out, I am going to put forward everything. So even if it's in your favor or in the perpetrator or the alleged perpetrator's favor, I will put that forth. I am just the police officer. I have to take that matter before the court, and then there's a judge and there's a jury. They are the ones who would make the decision. Okay?
Thank you so much for your responses so far on the area of confidentiality and dealing with perpetrators. I have here 3 questions. One, to Dr. Gomes. Are doctors required to report when they suspect a patient has been abused? And how is that process done?
In the case of minors, we are required to report any form of abuse that we might see. In the case of adults, we can only counsel them. It depends on the injuries that they sustain. If it's something that is detrimental, yes, we might call the police in that case. But with adults, we can only counsel them because of their rights. So with adults, we try to counsel them to seek further help, but it's not an obligation for us to report it.
Sorry, can I just, in relation to households where there are children, it would be deemed to be that there's abuse taking place in that household. So there would be an expectation that that information is shared with the Department of Social Development.
Well, that's in the case if we know that there are kids in the household, but most of the time we have no background on the household whatsoever.
Okay. It have a delay. We do have rape kits, and in the event where there is a case of rape, say for example, they come to us, then we will take the rape kit with us, confidentially, of course. You know, you kind of secure it. I personally put it in a bag or no, because you know, outside of it will mark the sexual assault kit, whatever. So you wrap that up, you walk with it, and the victim take it to the hospital, and then the doctor perform the examination. After that is done, I will collect back the rape kit, because you know there's a chain of custody. Collect the rape kit, and I would have to hand it over to the exhibit storekeeper, who will make preparation to send it off. Usually our department home, not Anguilla, we had sole responsibility of that kit. So we would put it in, we have a refrigerator in our office, we put it and then we take it to the lab ourselves, but Anguilla don't have that. So we'll hand it over to the exhibit keeper, he send it off if there's needs, if the matter is going to go through, because the kit is very expensive and the process is very expensive as well.
To make the process a little easier as well, usually the police, they call ahead of time and the person is escorted directly into a private room. They don't even go to the front by the receptionist to put their name down or anything like that. They're escorted directly in. And the rape kit is handed directly from the police officer to the doctor in the private room. Everything that is collected is placed in a sealed bag, and the doctor has to sign across the seal. So if that seal is ever broken before the rape kit reaches wherever it has to reach, they will know, because the signature would be tampered with.
Sorry for asking all these questions. But if the victim comes into the hospital before reporting to the police that something has happened, and during the process of an examination says or admits that they want to have a rape kit administered, is the process simply that you call the police to deliver it, or is there one available at the hospital?
No, we would have to call the police to deliver it.
Thank you. While we continue to accept questions from the floor, I have two questions. We're speaking about the victimization of survivors. In Mrs. Carty's presentation, she spoke about a case where a mom and minor, a child, was taken from her home to live with family. The individual asking the question wanted to know what transpired, was there a case, and what was your responsibility as a Department of Social Development. And along the same lines, in terms of survivors and victimization, Detective De Souza have asked that persons report what protection or what protective measures can the police provide for persons who report domestic violence. So first question to Mrs. Carty, in terms of the case you shared and the victim or the survivor and the minor asking, well, were taken out of the home and was relocated. What transpired and what was your responsibility as a Department of Social Development? And Detective De Souza spoke about, and you encourage persons to report. What protective measures can the police provide for persons who report domestic violence? Mrs. Carty and then Detective De Souza.
Okay, in the little case scenario that I gave you, the mother and the child returned to the home over and over again. Okay, which is one of the things that is noted, unfortunately, with a lot of gender-based violence, domestic violence. When people are in those situations, it's not once and it never happens again. They go back with the hope that things are going to be okay. One of the issues that we have here in Anguilla is that if you're unemployed, particularly as women, the welfare state happens to be a male, 9 times out of 10. So they become dependent on the perpetrator to be able to look after them, to meet their needs and the needs of their children. It takes a long time for them to come out. Fortunately, with this particular case, the client is no longer in that particular relationship. The other concern for us with a lot of cases is that they can end up in a similar relationship, because that becomes the foundation, what they know, and almost as if they attract that same kind of relationship. So that's an unfortunate side of things. Our responsibility, on that particular day when she was presented, we had the dilemma. We have no refuge for women and children. We have no housing that the government deals with in Anguilla. So we're in a position now where we're having to beg people. And there have been some wonderful people in the community who have in the past. You know, Harriet Tubman used to help the slaves to be able to get through underground. Well, we had some people in Anguilla who have done exactly that, who have been fearless and done that because they've put their necks on the block. Because there are people who are in positions of power, maybe not by a steam of position, but they're noted as being people who can do you harm. And people are usually afraid of those kind of things, but they have opened up their doors and secured some women for a period of time in Anguilla. And I just want to go on a little bit in relation to St. Lucia. A similar thing happened with a young woman who had ran from a place in Castries and came to Soufrière in South, where I was. Her sister was afraid to house her because the man was coming back for her. I actually took her in my home because one of the things that the minister was talking about, we also have to get past this place of fear, because that's what they use to hold and control people and make them victims, and the other people are going to feel the same. And until we're in a position of being able to stand up and say no also, because it's not just that individual. It's my daughter tomorrow, or maybe my granddaughter, or my cousin. And I would want to know, because all of those people I've mentioned are in England, I would want to know that somebody is going to stand up and be there for them. Don't be afraid.
Okay. So, under the Domestic Violence Act, the victim has the right to attend the police station and say that they want a protection order. When they would have to fill out the affidavit, we will take it to the court along with the victim. You go before the magistrate, and the magistrate will make an interim order. And after that, if the victim wishes to continue, then after the matter is heard in court, then the judge will, the magistrate will make a final order. So that is in place here in Anguilla. It's just for the victims to come on board. Many of them, like I said, they are fearful of, reprisal. Like Ms. Carter said, most of the time the perpetrators are the only source of finance. Within that protection order, if that is so, you can make an application for financial support as well, and the judge may grant you that. So there is that is in place for victims here in Anguilla.
Thank you very much for your responses so far. And thank you to those who have been and will be submitting questions. We have an additional set of questions. And this question is a general question. From your respective roles, what do you think the judiciary and our legal partners can do to be more supportive when it comes to gender-based violence and domestic violence matters? What do you think that the judiciary and our legal partners can do to be more supportive when it comes to gender-based violence and domestic violence matters?
As soon as you read the question, one of the things that comes to mind to me as well is also within the court system, when people go in. I mean, the court can be quite an intimidating environment, and not knowing how things work can also put people off. We don't have what we call a legal aid system in Anguilla, and I really do feel that that's something that needs to come on board, because having legal representation goes a great way to helping you to be able to navigate what your rights are, or support mechanisms that can be given. As Officer D'Souza said, it's part of the Domestic Violence Act. One of the things that can happen during the process within the court is that you can ask for financial assistance. If you haven't got somebody who's working with you on that, it's much more difficult for you to stand there with the perpetrator in that space and make that request, to have a means test done maybe on that person. But having someone from a legal background who can stand up and say, this person earns X, Y, and Z, and they need X, Y, and Z, is much easier. So that was one of the first things that came to mind for me.
So, as you read the question, that was the same thing. I think that lots of people do not have the financial support. And you go into the courts and, if the perpetrator has the ability to have a lawyer and you don't have one, then what do you do? I also think that there's something else that maybe can be done. And I know in some areas there have been some educational programs, but I think there needs to be more educational programs on our radios, on our television, and wherever, in more town hall meetings, and getting people to know and to understand how the system, how the legal system works. Maybe also getting lawyers to be able to be at those forums and be able to talk about how things can go and what can happen to help. I think many people don't know the law. Many of the people who are being, who are the victims, many of us don't know the law. We don't know what to do first, where we should go, and so people generally need to educate themselves. I had a situation where I was asked to see someone, and I spoke to this person, and in speaking to them, they were very reluctant to say exactly what, and I said to them, you know what, you need to probably go online, or you need to go to the Bar Association somewhere and ask them for information on what happens in this situation. And she went. And when she got the information, she knew exactly what steps to take and what she needed to do. So it's really about educating. And our laws, we, as I said, we don't know the laws. And so it's difficult when you're hurting, when you've been abused and you're hurting and you're frightened. It's not the time that you really probably want to be going to read and that sort of thing. So those need to be proactive things that needs to be done. I say to people all the time, if you're in a relationship that your partner is abusive, begin to make some very serious decisions. The first decision is, should you be in that relationship? And secondly, what laws protect you in that area?
Thank you so much for these responses. We're going to take one question from the floor, but before that, Angelina, I'm reminded of that document we started to write many years ago about legal aid. So it's always an opportunity to, I guess, dust it up and see what support we can get to continue, particularly now that we have some staggering, some frightening statistics of our continued increase in cases as regards to gender-based violence. Again, it's everybody's business. Thank you. Question from the floor?
Yeah, good night. I think it would be interesting to know, during the introduction of the program tonight, the scenario was played out to say that with domestic violence in the home, we sometimes see the children play it out in school. Gender-based violence happening in school, you know, boys fighting girls and stuff like that. It's on a smaller basis. But I want to know if, when that happens, if it's in a way that you can identify or relate that that has happened because of or due to the home's condition.
A lot of the time, you actually know it's coming from the home. Even before, I mean, when you're talking, we're thinking about bigger children in the playground playing. We get incidents of children in the, we used to call it Wendy House, home corner. Children are playing, mummies and daddies or whatever, and the children, kindergarten, they're actually playing it out. And we've had children before now who will say things to you that, oh, my daddy choke off my mummy. They see it, they will enact it because of what they've seen. They haven't got a name for it, but they're doing it because this is what big people do. And they're learning directly from that. Go ahead.
There's an old adage, children live what they learn, and children often mirror what they see. That's, the home is the first learning institution, and that is what I think a lot of us today is forgetting. So many parents are waiting for the children to go to school and think that is where they're learning. I mean, we all know that children are learning even from when they're in the womb. So that's one of the how we know that it is coming from home. And most of the time when investigations are carried out, it is a fact. They are living what they learn, and this is why it's important for us to really pay attention. I know that the commissioner has brought on stream now, like a troubled family, supporting family, and this is what, so we, from school, we are identifying certain students, a student that is, it's not a one-off thing, this is a student that is doing it over and over. So now you find that the commissioner is working, it's a team, Ms. Carty is part of it, the education is on board. So we are doing something to try and curb these things, because this is exactly what we need to do in society, nip it in the butt.
Pastor James, also, I think in my situation, I work quite close with Hyacinth. We work with the supporting families, we work with students. And one of the things that for myself, even as a pastor, working with children, I had a situation where a mother brought her son to me and said that he wanted to speak to me. I spoke to him in a school situation, with all of the children, and he told his mother he wanted to come and talk with me. And he came, but he wouldn't talk because his mom was in the room, right? When she left, he said to me that his girlfriend abuses him. She beats him up. Now, this is a 15-year-old boy, right? And he's saying that his girlfriend beats him up and tells him that no man is going to treat her like how her father treats her mother. You understand what I'm saying? And so, right there, you see it, it's right there, coming out, right, she's being proactive, coming out of the homes. And my colleague spoke about children. I've had parents who say to me, I don't know what's going on. She's playing with her brother, and he's playing with his sister, and he's slapping her, and he's beating her, and he's pushing her down. And she says, I don't know where they're getting it from. And I said, okay, well, let's talk. We begin to talk, and before long, you realize that some of these things are happening right in the home. They're seeing it happen. And sometimes as parents do not want to accept. It took a while before that parent admitted. Both I've seen male and females, a while before they admit, yes, this happened. Doesn't happen often, but sometimes I just get upset, or but it happens. And as Officer D'Souza says, it's what they see, right? They're going to live out. Children learn what they learn.
Thank you. I know there are some questions from the floor. I just wanted to add, I'm very pleased that that question was shared. It gives us an opportunity to speak about the National Parenting Program that was launched, Family First, and within that, working closely with the supporting family. What we've realized, and that's data, that's research here on Anguilla, a number of our young teenagers, specifically young men that we've been working with continuously, that continue to exhibit deviant behaviors at school, the fights and the carrying of elements in schools, etc. It has linked back to the home and the community. And the home may not necessarily be mom and dad, but a lot of persons also live in extended families, and the behaviors that they see, it definitely passes on to them. So we're trying our best through the Family First and through the Supporting Family project to really try to get a hand on things. Before I take some questions from the floor, there's another question we have online. just wanted to hear Apostle Elmead from His Majesty's Prison. We were wondering if you have any statistics offhand from His Majesty's Prison in terms of the population of inmates that are in HMP for domestic violence related matters. And another question, I believe that will go to Ms. Carty and Detective De Souza. In cases of domestic violence and gender-based abuse, what proportion of cases are non-nationals, and how is support offered to them?
Thank you very much. I cannot give a specific figures to that question, really. So that's something that'll have to be looked into and maybe on another forum spoken about. But I can't give any specific information on that at the moment.
Thanks for that. And the second question, in cases of gender-based violence and domestic violence, what proportion of cases are non-national, and how is support offered to them?
Okay, the bit about proportion, I'm not sure if I can answer that in terms of stats. What I clearly remember is last year, that there was a particular island other than Anguilla, people coming through that had quite a high percentage of cases coming from that island, almost leading you to get into possibly suggesting that there was something more going on in that particular country and how they were educated in relation to how they dealt with females and relationships. And it was one particular, I won't name the island because we're not going to get into all of that, but that was something that was noted, and we do take information about where people are from. Anybody who comes to our doorsteps, no matter what country they're from, you're in Anguilla, you're experiencing some difficulties, we will work with the family. We will work with the individual. So there won't be any discrimination just because you're not from Anguilla, not in the Department of Social Development.
Thanks for that. We're just trying to capture some of the thanks for your responses so far. Just trying to get some other questions. While we collate the questions online, we're going to be taking 2 questions from the floor. We'll start with Ms. Roberts.
Good night. When we were talking about children, I wondered if there's any program set up, and I feel like if it doesn't have one, if the ministry, the social development, and the police can formulate some sort of program to start in the primary schools where children are thought, this is what should happen. I know there's a subject called HFLE in school that teaches them, persons are not supposed to touch you here or there. But I'm wondering if they can, they have a program where either the police can go into the school and say, listen, if this is happening to you, this is what you do. If you see mommy gets beat up by daddy, if you see this, you can report by calling this number, or this is called abuse. And just start at the basics, because when children hear those things and know what to do, you find a lot more of it come out, which some parents may be at home saying, I wish my child would go and tell a teacher so that I can get help because the person just doesn't want to report it. And that would be the first step of someone hearing about the situation that might help someone who is in need. So I'm wondering if there's any programs that we have set up, and if there isn't, can something with the ministry, the police, anyone can start something to help persons that are victimized.
It takes a while. It's always warming up. Okay, so as you know, there would have been like the DARE program already established. However, that's one of the first things I came and I saw that there was and there is a need for us, especially the safeguarding investigation unit, to go into the schools and at least, teach children. And it's not only at primary level. We intend to go all the schools in Anguilla. About a month ago, I actually got all the information and said that I will reach out to the teachers and see how best we can work together, So it was recommended that we work with the community relations. So look out for that in the coming year, where we will be coming into the school, whether it be a devotion. Also, I definitely would want us to be part of the PTAs as well, because we need to let people be aware of what our roles and functions are so that they can get the support that they need from the police.
Sure. What we have done before now, and I think the social planner, Miss Keisha Beebe, who's sitting very quietly at the back, before now had got the primary schools in particular together and was looking at anti-bullying, because I think on that premise we can start to talk about violence with young people. So that was something that was done, and with the community centres involved as well. And I think there's the opportunity for us to pick that back up and to be able to run with that, and maybe working in conjunction with the police to deliver. I think one of the things that we're a little bit conscious of is that a lot of children see police to be around because they do something bad. They're doing something bad, and you get a kind of different response when they've got that reaction. And that's because police primarily have been seen as the person who's going to arrest you. And unfortunately, we've got some parents who say exactly that to the child: you misbehave, I'll call Officer D'Souza on you. And, so we have to be a bit careful with that, because the police are generally on our side.
And just to further, just informing children of what is abuse and who can be an abuser. Because I know of situations where a young girl, for example, you gotta lift from school, you gotta lift home. It was, for example, a police officer or a minister. And the person diverted, parked up somewhere, and started to, you're developing really nice, and wanted to touch you certain places. The young lady was unaware, that's even called abuse. And only after several years, the person was able to open up and say, well, this police officer, he picked me up from school, he didn't drop me right home, we parked up in a corner, and he touched me, he asked me to open my shirt. And something as simple as that, the child did not know, that a police officer would abuse you, or those kind of persons. And that's the strange thing. Who can be an abuser? Sometimes you pinpoint maybe a dad or a brother or uncle, but you have people in the community who children trust at the most, and those are the persons that are doing it. Coaches, for example, the coaches carry me home, but they carry me last, and the coach touched me this way, and the children don't know that, okay, that is abuse, you can report something like that. So those things need to be established in schools from young.
They are actually happening. In relation to child protection, there are projects that we do, and particularly around Social Work Month, we will go round to the schools and look at talking about social protection, child protection, and speaking to children with regards to that. So it is something that's happening on an annual basis.
There is a program presently which is run by Family First, and that's a we are meeting with both young men and young teenagers, where we have in-depth discussions with them, small group discussions with them, and then we meet with parents and have discussions with them. And those sessions have really been tremendous, the amount of information that has come out. And then when those two sessions are finished, we then meet with both parent and the child or children. Again, that is a very successful program that is being run. It's still young in its days, but already we can see that it has the potential to help. We've seen parents, and one of the good things, even men too, are coming forward and saying, I'm concerned about my child, my son, my daughter, and whatever. And so it's helping us to be able to work with, it may be a small group now. And what I think is happening is that some of these parents are telling other parents about the group, and so they're coming. Just today, I had 2 parents who called me and said, I heard about this group. Is it just for certain people? I said, no. You know, I said, you can call, and I gave them Hyacinth's number, and so that when we have another meeting, they can attend, and so on. So it's happening. It may be slow off the mark, but it's happening, and I believe that it's going to make a great big impact, you know, and I think, you know, that has to happen.
And just to add, the Gender Affairs Unit will be launching our website that we would have developed in partnership with PAHO, also the Department of Social Development, and PAVE. It's called Interventions for Child Abuse and Neglect, and there is a dedicated page there for children where children can go and get information about child abuse, what is abuse, what should I look out for. There's also a resource page there for parents, and also a page that is dedicated to mandated professionals, so doctors, nurses, teachers can also go there. They can access the different laws that surrounds child abuse and neglect. There's also the reporting form there that they can also go ahead and submit a report from that website. So that is coming out in the first quarter of the year.
Very good, very good. While we're talking about programs that are there for children and for adults, one of the programs, it would have been mentioned in my bio with regards to being a co-author of a program called Experiencing the Sacred Woman. And that was done in partnership with Gender Affairs. And that was specifically for women who were experiencing or who had experienced domestic violence. And it was a 12-week program. In fact, my co-author, Kay Ferguson, is actually in the audience. And that program actually, even up to a day like today, was run in, probably about 6 years or so ago now. And there was a group chat that was set up from that. And every single one of those women are still involved in that and have all moved on to different places. Well, there's 4 of them are actually gone to the UK now and are living. And they actually have given feedback in terms of what the experiences they had on the program and what that did in terms of lifting their self-esteem to not find themselves back into those similar kind of relationships. So, you know, being able to do that again, having a program like that again would be, I think, excellent if it's something that we could do on a continuum. And there's also been the Phoenix program, which has been for the men, where it's looked at, similarly a 12-week program, which came out of the Elias Center. And the Elias Center was also instrumental in the Experiencing the Sacred Women's program, where those programs looked specifically at working with males and females and getting them to look at the issues that pertain to us. And while we're talking about, you know, gender and people feeling that, you know, everything's intertwined and it's, you know, equality, etc., I'm not dismissing any of that, but there are particular things that are necessary for men to talk about and for women to talk about at this time, so that we can start unraveling the things that have been happening, and in smaller groups, allowing people to have that opportunity to be able to talk and help to sharpen and assist one another and become a support group for one another.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Excellent responses and dialogue and questions. We're mindful of the time, and we also know, though, that we do have some more questions, so we will be taking them. Just wanted to add that while questions are being posed, we do see among ourselves as government employees and as community persons and stakeholders the need for strong collaboration as we continue to fight the fight with eradication of crime and violence. So that of awareness, that of resources is being shared strongly while we respond things. So we really are grateful for that engagement. I also remember a document that would have been coordinated by our social development planner, that of a booklet, Safeguarding. So that is also available, and it was also translated by yours truly in Spanish. I believe we could also get some more copies that could be made available to our community and our school population. Angelina Carty and Detective D'Souza. Before we take some questions from the crowd, we need to know how much is enough information. Persons may be fearful or hesitant to approach and to discuss about their situation as regards gender-based violence. How much information is enough to provide so that some support can be given?
If it's somebody who's talking about them trying to give us information about something that's happening to somebody outside, the information that we need is obviously the name of the person, where they live, and some contact details. Okay. Whether you know that person would be open to us making direct contact with them. If the person's got children, that's important for us to know. Because then that allows us another inroad in to be able to get to the person that needs help. As an individual, if you're coming to us, some of the things that we ask for on our intake form is obviously your name, where you live, and contact details from you, and then what you're ready to share with us at that time about what's been happening. I mean, before now, I've been on the other end of our cell phone and somebody's called, and they've just wanted to know. I'm speaking on behalf of a friend. That's usually how it starts. And I want to know what would happen. I'm living with somebody who's not giving me any money. I've been working for how long? They hold all the finances. What would the department do to help me? Something along those lines. And I've had to give advice to that person in terms of them being able to do things to help themselves in that situation. And it's like, I want to say it here and I don't want to say it here, because what we also know is that the same information that we're giving out, perpetrators are using this information to be able to continue to hurt people. So I'm mindful about how much I share to a wider audience than if I'm sharing it with somebody who's actually in the position of being a victim, a survivor, and hopefully a thriver. Does that help answer that question?
Just to add, how much information is enough? Usually when I start off with speaking with a victim, or let me say the victim, the first thing I tell them, I am not here to judge. Because at the end of the day, when you tell me all that is happening to you, you'll be able to get all the help and all the help that you need. So it is not good that you're just gonna hold back, because that might be very important to the case. So I would say that the victim needs to tell us all that is happening so that we can get the required help that they need, right? Because at the end of the day, I am all about self-actualization. We might know the right person to refer the person to, because a lot of time, self-esteem is what keep a lot of these victims inside of those situations. They feel as if they are not good enough. I will not find anybody that would love me this much. Love does not hurt. So that's the first thing. All right, so for me, telling us all, because at the end of the day, we are sworn to keep things confidential. if I, as the police, breach that, there is a department, the professional standard department, that you can report me to, and I will go, I will be investigated, and if I'm found guilty, then I will be penalized. So I hope that answered the question.
Okay, thank you so much. Here we have 2 questions from the floor. We have Mrs. Webster Brooks and Ms. Murphy for your questions.
It's not really a question per se, it's more of a comment. I've heard you talk about it's happening, and I like to hear the word it's happening. And we spoke about confidentiality. As we know, people must trust you in order to say something confidential. But then again, you know, sometimes somebody may come to us and say, I'm so upset, I feel like I taking all these tablets tonight. Huh? Now, the person may be saying it to me. I know that my limitations in that area. I should be able to say that, well, I can't help you with that, but I know somebody, say it in a friendly way, you know, I know somebody who can offer support to you, you know. And then again, the person may say, I'm not going to she or he. And I would say to the person, okay, come, we going to go. And I go with the person, and then we sit down. What you're going to say to that person in front of me, you know, you may not want to say. So I would allow you to go with the person, and I stay over here and reassure you. I'm still here, I'm just waiting. Take your time, do what you have to do. But again, if the person doesn't trust you, the person will not do. And then we talk about the anti-bullying. Again, it's happening. And as the pastor there, we are saying we need to go back to the schools on those personal social education sessions and talk to these children, like when we have in morning devotions, it don't have to be a big assembly. You get a better acceptance when it's like, say, go to a classroom, the teacher identifies where, and then you are better able to talk. Pastor, you also made reference to where the boy said his mother saying they wanted to talk the bad things he do, you know. Again, probably that's her way of seeking support, you know, not realizing that the way in which she's doing it, she's harming him, you know, because then he will withhold things. And reference was made to us not having a legal aid system. Some years ago, when QC Don Mitchell was in the system, he used to render some support to social development. So I tend to think that that is something that we can follow up with. And I must compliment the panelists for doing such a good job, because having been a past officer, I can identify with some of the things you are saying. And it is by coincidence tonight that we are in the Seroptimus Hall, where we are seeing the picture of that lady up there, Mrs. Ina Woodstock, 103 or 105 years right now. And she is the person who initiated this Seroptimus Club to be a support to families from we having to have children, you know, going to the prison or whatnot. So thank you all, and it's happening, and we'll all support each other. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Question from Ms. Murphy.
Thank you. So I know that throughout the evening we've been talking a lot about experiences, also about challenges, and I also know that based on the bios that was read, that all of you would have had experiences in different countries working you know, in gender-based violence and across, you know, social and health sector. So as we move forward in addressing gender-based violence in Anguilla, what I'd love to hear from each of you is some recommendations, some best practices that you would have picked up in those experiences outside of Anguilla that is not being implemented here as yet. So I know that we would have touched on legal aid and also maybe some educational programs, but if I can just hear some more from your specific sector and your professional experiences, some best practices that you think would work for us here in Anguilla.
If I can speak into that, one of the things, and earlier on, I think it was the minister when she was speaking, and I may sound a bit controversial, don't mean to be, but while I agree that gender-based violence is mainly perpetrated against women, we cannot continue to leave out the fact that gender-based violence against men is on the increase. I am speaking as a counselor who meet with many men. Sometimes they're afraid to go to the police station. I have had men who have said to me they've gone to the police, they've spoken to a police, and they laugh at them. Oh, you're a sissy, man. You have some woman beating you up. Why don't you just do this and do that? And what I'm saying, while yes, that the gender-based violence is mainly against women, my hope, and you're talking about how we deal with things in the future, that we do not lean so much to the left and find ourselves 5 more years down the road where we are now talking about gender-based violence mainly against men. I know it may not be a very popular thought, but when you look at the figures, I've been in counseling now for almost 30 years. I have seen consistently, I have a thing working with men. I want to see men come out of their closets and do things, but I also want to see men who are perpetrators of gender violence stop. But I want it not just stop, but how do we prevent it from happening to our young children? In my opening statements, I spoke about the 15-year-olds who are seeing it in their homes. Many of our young boys are going down that road. I remember speaking to you sometime, and I said that when we're having things for men, let us not just include men, but let's include the boys. I think, I stand to be corrected, I think it was Hitler who said, give me a boy at 15, I can do nothing with him. Give me a boy at 5, and at 15, I'll give you a soldier who has no fear. We need to begin to understand and to accept that yes, gender violence against women is great. It is out of proportion. But creeping up behind of us is gender-based violence against men. I can speak about it. I'm not afraid to do so. My first marriage broke up because of gender-based violence. And I made a decision the first day that I was abused by my wife. I went to my office, I told my secretary, find me an apartment by the end of the day or you don't have a job tomorrow. I went home and I told my wife, this is it. The minute you begin to hit me, and I'm going to hit you, and that was it. I know what it is. And I'm saying that let's not forget that there are men who have also been abused and badly abused. How do we get these men to begin to talk? I have tried to encourage 2 men to come here tonight, and they wouldn't for nothing. They say they're going to be laughed at. They'll become the laughing stock tomorrow. We've got to find ways. I, along with a few other pastors, we are beginning to look at ways. We are beginning to start some programs within our churches, within the communities, to deal with men who have been abused and who are being abused. Not to take away from the reality of what is happening, but as I said before, that we do not find ourselves 5 years, 10 years down the road, speaking about gender-based violence from the other perspective. And our young men, let's begin to reach out to them, find ways, some of the things we're doing to educate them that gender-based violence against women is not accepted.
Very powerful, yes. I'm going to my mouth. Can you hear me? Okay. In relation to what you're saying, there's always been gender-based violence against men. What's happening now is that it's being reported, okay? So I think we're seeing higher numbers because more people are feeling more comfortable about reporting. I know when I was working in St. Lucia, one of the good practices that I saw was with regards to a women's refuge that they had. Now, believe it or not, I worked as a social worker in St. Lucia, and I cannot tell you where that women's refuge is. Only who needed to know knew. The women that were transported there, I don't even think they knew how they got there, okay, in terms of the transportation that was used to get them there, so they couldn't let anybody else know. There was an awful situation in the UK where there was a women's refuge. The woman left there a time. She went back to the partner who was abusing her. She left again. She went back to that refuge. And she was killed outside that refuge because they was able to find where that refuge was. Okay. In Anguilla, I'm not sure how we would be able to find a place because of the terrain where you could securely have a house that could take on some women. But I know that we need a place or places where women can be safe, or men at some point, but we couldn't have both together. Even though they're having the similar experiences, they would need to be separate. But we need to have somewhere. We need to have something that only who needs to know knows, so that we can keep some women safe. Unfortunately, we've experienced death in relation to violence with women in Anguilla before now. So that's one of the good practices, both in England and in St. Lucia, that I'm aware of, that I know would go some way in terms of us being able to support women. I'll say in the first instance, we have to start somewhere, and particularly those with children who need that assistance. That's something that comes to the top of my head immediately.
One of the things that I would love to see here is a victim services unit. Victim services unit. Now that would be our victim support unit. That, as I've worked in Jamaica, where I've seen that department is very important to the justice, getting justice for victims as well, because this unit would be a unit. Because I've seen here, I came and I saw that they didn't have none. Where do I send victims who even, they don't want to go any further, but would want to talk to somebody? I mean, I'm just using my little social work counseling skills that I picked up along the way to give some advice. But they want somebody who was trained. Where do I send this person? The victim services does not only counsel people. In the event where you have trials or whatever, they would meet, especially children and vulnerable people. They meet with you on a regular. They see how well you are prepared, or they prepare you for the process. They let you know what the possibility are the person might be found guilty, they might not. How do you deal with that? I've seen here in particularly, I did my internship at the probation department, and I've seen where a matter finished in court, got finished in court, and to that date when they were doing the victim impact to see how the victim is dealing with it, she cannot deal with the trauma that she went through up to now. And it is that maybe that person would have to go pay to see a counselor. If the government would implement a victim services unit, then the person can get that support free of charge. And I think it's very, very vital. So that is one of the things I would recommend that they consider, get even the pastors to work on board with, people that are trained in counseling to speak with these victims so that they could learn ways and means how to survive these things, how to get over it. Because guess what? From my experience, you really never get over it, but you actually learn how to cope with it. You learn how to deal with certain things. You know how to identify when something is going to come that will trigger. The triggers, that would probably send you in a state of depression. They will teach you the ways and means how to get to deal with these things. So that is something I would want to see. And of course, I stated earlier that I recommend that all victims, whether it be male or females, they report the matter. Tell somebody. You must have, you don't trust the police. And the sad thing is a society that don't trust the police will eventually trust the criminals. So if you don't want to come to the police, find somebody. You must know somebody that you can talk to, tell somebody. That's one of the first things too, that when you preparing case files, sometimes we would ask, did you tell anyone? Because that is known as I forget the word right now, but that is a crucial person to say that, okay, so let me just use rape for example. Did you cry out? Did you tell somebody? If you did, that kind of support, because yes, she did tell me, and then, that's pretty much my two cents. Oh, another thing is, I am a mother of three. Oh, I am a mother of three. And one of the things that I hate, I can't wait to see the day we take away a role from gender. I am training somebody's husband and I'm training somebody's wife. I don't want any man to lay on my daughter, nor do I want my son to lay on anybody's daughter. And this is where we need to start. We need to start teaching our children how to respect each other. If you cannot respect your own, if you cannot respect your sister or your aunt, how are you going to respect some stranger? So that is where, for me, we really need to start.
In the Caribbean in general, there is a stigma against psychiatric problems in the community. People on a whole, they don't like to visit the psychiatric unit in the hospital. I don't know what it is, but there is a stigma against it, and there are a lot of mental problems in the community that go unchecked because people don't want to go to the correct facility to seek help, because for some reason the stigma would be, you're a crazy person. And that is not the case. All mental problems have some sort of solution, but you have to get the correct help from the right place. And we have to get rid of that stigma in the community so that members of the community can start getting the help that they really need. I worked in St. Lucia as well, and they have a great psychiatric facility. In Anguilla, unfortunately, we do not have a psychiatrist on island. They do teleservice, which is over something like Zoom. So hopefully in the future, we will actually have a psychiatrist on island ready to tackle all of the little, it can be a little mental problem that you have that can cause a big problem later on. So if you tackle it in the beginning, you can get rid of the problems that might come up later on. And also, what I would like to see in Anguilla is a more, I guess you would call it like Alcoholics Anonymous. We need that in Anguilla. I know there is a small chapter, but it's not really official, but I would love to see a drug and alcohol program to help Anguillians deal with the drug and alcohol problem that we have, because as an Anguillian, I lived off of Anguilla for many years, going to school and working, and I am truly sad to come back and see, especially the young men. They're all involved in some form of drugs. And that is not something that bodes a good future for Anguilla. We need both the young men and young women to have a prosperous country. And the road we are going down now with drugs and alcohol, that's not going to happen. With drugs and alcohol, you see more violence. So if we can implement some form of alcohol and drug program in Anguilla, I think that can help the young people as well.
Thank you so very much for your questions and your responses, esteemed members of the panel. We've now come to the end of our panel discussion for this evening. And before I hand the mic over to Kim to give final closing remarks and thank yous, just wanted to briefly highlight some of the key recommendations that were shared in terms of best practices that could possibly be transferred to Anguilla. We spoke about, and that was based on a question, we spoke about more opportunities to provide awareness, particularly to our young persons, and specifically to what is defined as violence or as being inappropriate behaviors. We spoke about the need for a women's refuge, women and children's refuge. And I know that along with the Gender Affairs Unit, we were looking at securing some funds to get this. So Knockwood partnership, it's everybody's business. Let's see what we can do to get this going. We spoke about a victim services support unit. Detective D'Souza shared about how that works on the island of Jamaica and how critical it would be to support our victims, or rather our survivors on the island. We spoke strongly, and we heard that strongly from Apostle Elmida Lean about the support for men. And it's interesting because just last week we had a meeting with there was an altercation with 13 young girls in the high school. And some of the adults present were like, "Are you allowed the girls in that too?" And I'm like, yeah, we've been focusing on the young men and their deviant behaviors at school, but our young women are part of the issues too. Okay, we spoke about education with respect to self, persons respecting themselves and respecting others, and how that can be enhanced in terms of parenting in the household. We spoke about an enhanced psychiatric support, an enhanced unit on the island, actually even to have a physical psychiatrist on island to continue to support persons from the leading list of issues. And we spoke about an alcohol anonymous support program to help particularly our young men. So again, thank you so very much. And as I come to the end of my stance as moderator, I just wanted to share briefly through the Family First program some of the sessions that will be coming and that will also support with the discussions we are having here this evening. So on the 7th of December, we will be having from 5 p.m. at the Herschel Gums Community Center. That's the center adjacent to Coal-Keel. A session that will be led by Stanley Reed on parenting and the law. As a parent, what you should know in terms of the law. Parenting and the law, that's 5 p.m. December 7th at the Herschel Gums Community Center. We also have a session at 5:30 on the West End Community Center on December 8th that speaks again to parents and homes, children in the homes and families. How do we express love and affirmation and nurturing? Love, affirmation, and nurturing. That's at 5:30 on December 8th at the Western Community Center. And we also have a session on managing of finance, managing of monies and budget. It's interesting that that topic was highlighted because persons have expressed the fact of they not being able to leave violent situations or relationships because of the dependence on the perpetrator. So a session on management of money and budget preparation. You may be having $1 to $1,000. How can you make that stretch? That is at the DYC Training Center on December 14th from 6 p.m. And lastly, we have a closed session for persons who are dealing with loss and grief. Just like an anonymous setting, persons dealing with loss and grief on December 16th, persons who are interested in benefiting from that engagement. Because of the sensitive nature, we will not disclose, but you could contact us at the Ministry of Social Development and through the PAVE hotline, which Kim will share. Thank you so very much for having me this evening. Kim.
Thank you. Thank you so very much, Mrs. Bradley. And thank you to everyone for the show of support this evening. To Seraptimus International Anguilla chapter, thank you for collaborating with the unit to bring this well-needed discussion to the fore. The Atson News Foundation and SAFE for their co-sponsorship. Special thanks to our moderator for this evening, Mrs. Hyacinth Bradley, who guided the discussion and also shared her professional experiences. To our esteemed panel, Mrs. Carty, Apostle Allen, Dr. Gums, and Detective D'Souza. Thank you so very much for taking the time out of your busy schedules to be with us this evening and to share your experiences. Your willingness to come here and sit here and share with us is appreciated. To Mrs. Webster Brooks, who delivered the invocation, thank you so very much. To Minister Kentish Rogers and Miss Tony Brodner, thank you for your remarks. To Mr. Lindsay Webb and his team for sound, thank you. What we do in Anguilla for the photos that we'll have up on our Facebook page by tomorrow. Thank you so very much. Clean Stream for the Facebook Live. Thank you, Chiron. I must say here that Chiron would have reached out to me and said, are you live streaming this event? And I said, well, you know, my budget is really tight. I can't afford it. And he's like, well, I'm going to give back. And so he took the time out, and he's here with us this evening. So kudos to you. Thank you so very much. Your service is appreciated. To the Seraptimus for the use of the building, thank you. As we wrap up this portion of the event, I encourage each of you to support the remaining activities on our 16 Days of Activism calendar. So we have 2 remaining activities. On Thursday, from 9 to 12, we'll be hosting a training workshop on violence and sexual harassment in the workplace with the Anguilla Civil Service Association. And we will end the campaign on Sunday with Authorize, which is the painting of a mural bringing awareness to gender-based violence at the Raymond Gishard Technical Center. This is in collaboration with the DYC's Maliana Fest and the Football Association. So persons are encouraged to stop by on Sunday throughout the day to look at the process come alive. So thank you so much for all of you, both here physically and also online, who took the time out to support this initiative this evening. As a reminder, just before I go, if you are experiencing violence, we encourage that if you feel it is safe to do so, to contact the Royal Anguilla Police Force or the Safe Hotline at 7233. If you feel it is safe to do so, disclose the violence to a trusted individual. Seek support from the Department of Social Development and the Gender Affairs Unit. Make a safety plan to protect and increase the safety of yourself and your dependents. Keep a record of the violence, and very importantly, remember you are not alone. Yeah. Thank you also to Nurse Kenisha Vanterpool, who came in this evening. I put her to task, so thank you so very much for your continued support. Really appreciate you. And of course, we have some light refreshment in the back, so please stick around. We can mingle some more and continue the conversation there some more. Thank you so very much for tuning in and for being with us tonight.